Today, I want to talk about sibling abuse because it's actually something that's incredibly common and not talked much about in our society. I recently posted about sibling abuse on TikTok and Instagram, and I got an overwhelming response to it with so many people sharing their own individual experiences. So now I think it's really important that we begin to have these conversations because a lot of us are having these experiences, think we're alone, and a lot of times we're not as alone as we think we are. The Sibling Aggression and Abuse Institute actually had a study that showed that about 1/3 of Americans have experienced abuse by their own siblings. Now, of course, siblings will fight and have issues, especially as they go through adolescent and teenage years. It is so normal to clash with people living in the same home, especially as we're learning who we are. But there's a real issue in our culture where so many parents are actually turning the other way, are ignoring abuse, or are downplaying it as just, sibling rivalry. What we know is that parental neglect and sibling abuse often go hand in hand. What that means is, in dysfunctional family systems, where there's often, whether it's physical neglect, the parent isn't home, or emotional neglect, there is equally stress and chaos in the home with a general lack of emotional connection or safety. Sometimes siblings grow up actually watching their parents in their own abusive relationships. Or because the parent isn't physically in the home or emotionally available, siblings might end up raising each other. Now, in some cases, a parent might even benefit from keeping siblings in conflict. And this is something I'll talk a little more about in a little bit. Generally speaking, there is a sense of powerlessness that is felt by children in dysfunctional homes, especially when they don't have a caregiver present as they need them to be. And many times, in order to deal with this loss of power, one sibling in the home can become really dominant or really controlling. And they do this because they feel internally helpless. They feel lost within the family system. So by dominating or controlling others, gives them a sense of power or control back. Now, in dysfunctional families, it is the children that really do struggle to see their parents clearly, to see any issues, any lacking. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you grew up in a home with a really angry, explosive parent. Might be your father who's really rough with your mother, and maybe rough with all of your siblings too. Now let's say you have a brother who might have struggled a lot to see your father realistically in a negative light as someone who does have a problem with their emotions. And as a result, your brother might go to such an extreme that they end up glorifying your father. So then what happens with all of the understandable anger that your brother feels based on their unmet needs? What happens is it comes out on who? You or your other siblings. And this is how a lot of sibling abuse begins. Siblings that tend to then get abused are often the ones who are easy, who are rational, who are quiet, and sometimes who are disconnected or who act like the abuse doesn't bother them. So let's talk a little bit about the different ways that sibling abuse can manifest. So sibling abuse can include everything from emotional shaming, name calling, bullying, right? When we're teased for the emotions we're having, or maybe called mean names. This especially happens a lot of times around our physical appearance, where it's highlighted, where we're shamed, where our features or our body or something else really sensitive is teased, is mocked on a regular basis. Now, sibling abuse can also look like actual moments of physical abuse or sexual abuse, having physical altercations, being beat up, sexually having our limits crossed, being touched inappropriately. Sibling abuse can include chronic humiliation, which can look like being bullied in front of others, maybe being forced to do things that we're just not comfortable doing, or being treated in any way that strips you of your dignity, especially, again, when other people are visible. And finally, sibling abuse can include moments of boundary violations, or what I'll call coercive experimentation. And this can look like anything from maybe locking a sibling in a dark room, maybe pressuring them to do something dangerous or scary, or maybe engaging in any behavior, right, that crosses your sibling's limits under the guise of play or curiosity or, hey, go do that, pushing them beyond their natural limits. Now, earlier, I talked a little bit about how sibling abuse often comes from parents who are emotionally neglectful, parents who emotionally aren't attuned or present, so much so that sometimes the parent doesn't even know that the abuse is going on. They might be working all the time so that emotionally they can't be as fully present, and they simply just don't see what's happening. Or they might be home, but in another room or distracted, not really paying full attention. And sometimes they might not acknowledge that it's abusive or conflictual at all. And they might end up thinking themselves that, oh, this is normal. This is just how siblings act. This is maybe how it was in my family growing up. So they don't even notice that this could be crossing a line in their current family. Now, sometimes parents actually do see the abuse that's taking place, and they don't do anything to stop it. Recently, someone in my community had shared that their brother often would end up pinning them down right in front of their mom. Their mom would be in the same room watching and saying nothing. Now, these moments add an extra layer of confusion and shame, because not only are we being hurt by our own sibling, but our parent is seeing this behavior. And instead of correcting it by setting a boundary, them allowing it to continue is implicitly or indirectly approving of that behavior. So what we end up learning is that we can't actually trust our parents to protect us, as is their job to, from pain, from hurt, even from the pain and hurt inflicted by our own sibling. So let's talk a little bit now about a few reasons why some parents might look the other way. It might be because they're scared themselves. Right? So for example, maybe mom is really aware that their son has a really big bad temper, and she actually, as the son grows, ends up feeling scared, feeling overpowered by their temper. Sometimes then looking the other way is her own form of survival or self-preservation. Another reason a parent might look the other way is because of what I'll call a pseudo-close relationship with the sibling inflicting the abuse. Sometimes the parent might have an unhealthy or a false sense of closeness. So they might feel then protective of this particular child or emotionally dependent on them. They become so enmeshed with the abusive sibling that they actually kind of need to deny that that behavior is helping to preserve the need that that child is meeting for them. Another reason why a parent might look the other way is because they themselves might be modeling and engaging in the same behavior. Sometimes this behavior, this abusive behavior, is normalized across the board to the point where it just becomes normal in the family, normal in the home. Mom and dad are doing it, and the siblings are too. And then finally, in some more extreme cases, there are parents who actually end up egging on this behavior or encouraging it. This becomes really common, especially with narcissistic parents who use their children to meet their own needs, who end up seeking compliance, control, domination. So in a sense, right, they want their children to be competing, or their children's competition, right, subconsciously makes the parent feel important, because subconsciously a situation has been created where, in a sense, the children are working hard by fighting with each other to earn the parent's love, approval, affection. So the parent, in a sense, encourages this focus, this conflict. They reinforce this behavior, cheering on as the children fight, because they're getting an emotional payoff, even if it's an unhealthy one. So if you're listening to this, if you're resonating, and if you know that you've experienced sibling abuse, what can you do? First, you can recognize that it did happen, that you're not crazy, you're not broken. Even if your parents and family is in denial of what happened, you can acknowledge that it happened. And the second step is you can break the habit of over-focusing on your parents' validation. a mistake that a lot of people make is they naturally want to go to their parent and talk about what happened, share with them the abuse that they experienced by their sibling. And when they do, maybe for the first time, share this, they're immediately met with, oh, you know what? You're just being sensitive. Stop being so dramatic. Or even more problematic, you're remembering it wrong. That never happened. Now, if you did experience sibling abuse, there's a high likelihood that you've come from a dysfunctional family system with other dysfunctional habits and patterns. So it's understandable then that you're met with denial. And remember, for your parents to accept that you did experience abuse from their other child, that's going to be a really difficult thing to accept, especially if they're not individuals who can engage in self-reflection, inner work, take responsibility and accountability. So if you do find that you need to talk to someone and you're not getting that need met by your parents, you're not getting validated, seek out a trusted friend, a supportive professional, somewhere you can go to allow yourself to validate what your parents can't or won't. Similarly, we want to break the habit then of focusing on getting our siblings' validation. Right? A lot of you, maybe you tried to bring this up to your sibling in adulthood and they might have denied it, didn't want to talk about it now. It's a really common thing to happen. A lot of people end up hearing things when we go to our sibling, hey, this happened in childhood and it hurt my feelings, it hurt me. We might hear things like, can't you just move on? We're adults now. Or maybe, we were just kids. Hearing these things can leave you feeling even more hurt, even more confused. So again, instead of trying to get your family, whether it's your parents or your siblings, to validate what happened, to offer closure, to take accountability, we can shift that focus back and focus on our own healing. And this is where a practice of differentiation can happen, right? Learning that we are different. We can validate different realities. We can have different wants, different needs from even those closest to us within our family. And it is building this strong, separate sense of identity, right, that allows us to actually then feel more connected when we are in relationship. And now the fourth step to heal from sibling abuse is you want to practice releasing the expectation of having an ideal relationship with your sibling. Now, this can be one of the most hardest steps, especially if you notice that you still have a desire and you want to be close to that sibling. Even though there was abuse, it can be natural to want to reestablish or to develop a connection. And at the same time, it's also okay, and we don't have to naturally have a close relationship with our siblings. Even though we're related, we still get to choose. And having a distant relationship or a non-existent relationship with a sibling doesn't mean that you're a failure or that something is wrong with you. I like to tell people in all of my work, your sibling is like any other person. Sometimes you get along with them, you align, you share common interests, you have respect, and sometimes you don't. Though a lot of us have this expectation or this ideal that because they're family, we should. A lot of us were given this message in our culture. So it's really important to notice if we have that belief and to release that expectation, especially when the relationship continues to be abusive or dysfunctional. And then the fifth and final step of healing from sibling abuse is we can begin to then refocus on ourselves, on our own needs. Because again, most of the time when we experience abuse from anyone, our sibling included, what we're actually losing is a sense of self-trust and a sense of self-identity. So what we need to do is to take those small daily steps to rebuild that self-connection so that we can grow in self-trust and become really clear on who we are as a part of our self-identity. So practically speaking, what can this look like? It can look like anything from letting yourself have some downtime, alone time, to explore or focus on what brings you joy. It might look like joining a new club, finding a new hobby, or revisiting an old hobby. Maybe putting yourself in a new social situation and learning how to set boundaries. Simply speaking, it's really just about getting to know yourself and to be kind to yourself as you do. Now, I hope this was helpful for you out there, especially if you've experienced sibling abuse. And I would love to open up the comments for you to share your journey in support of other people who have experienced similar.